at the CMK Symposium. Here, putting up Jim's booth. This is our little spot.
More disorganized than usual getting started yesterday, so we didn't remember to make this announcement. One thing that we had planned to do during the symposium is collect written questions for members of the panel to answer. So I think what we'll do is plan on collecting questions at the registration table this morning and into the early afternoon for members of the panel, including Rosemary Archer, Charles Craver, and those people you see sitting down there at the table when we're all in the ring there. It just works better if people have time to think about the questions and maybe read them over a few times instead of trying to... This is a nice, relaxed, at-home picture of Skowronek, unretouched, in a bit of winter coat. This is labeled on the back, Skowronek at my place, which I take to mean that it was at Musgrave Clark's. But anyway, there he is, and he certainly was a very distinctive and handsome and beautiful horse in his day. You can see where a stallion like that would provide some real breeding options and go on in a number of directions, but with the good mares that were available to him. As Lady Wentworth said, Skowronek's fame is exactly halved by the influence of the Cravat mares, but on the other hand, the Cravat mares did very well with Skowronek, so it was certainly a mutual benefit society. We're going to go through a few of his get here just to get a feeling for the Skowronek stamp. This is Raida, who was one of the mares that came to Kellogg's in 1926, the first Skowronek horse to come to North America came to Kellogg's in 1926. That was first used in Cravat in 1920. Musgrave Clark had ridden a few foals from it before. So they came right along here pretty quick. That was Raida. This is Narawan, who went to South America and has a daughter, Narawana, that came to Traveler's Rest. So he is in pedigrees. This is Naziri. As I say, Nassim got lost in the shuffle, but this is his brother Naziri. Among the first cross, as Rosemary says, from what Lady Wentworth said and wrote, this gave her a feeling for what it was going to do for her with her mares and what she wanted to incorporate into the Cravat program. This is Nasra's son, so it's out of one of the best of the straight blunt mares, and bred to Skowronek. Well, in the terms we were using yesterday, Nasra was half Ali Pasha Sharif and half blunt. But this is Raftan, that was a distinctly Skowronek type horse that was used in Ireland and England. Made a marvelous sire of show ponies and really was quite legendary in that field, although he also has bred on in purebred breeding quite well also, with fewer offspring in that context. Again, as I said yesterday, I'll try to remember to look around for hands, but if you have a question, do make a noise, because this, of course, is Racine, who was the Skowronek stallion that lived to breed on at Kellogg's and made a tremendous sire there, a great record, and still very important in CMK pedigrees, in worldwide Arabian breeding pedigrees. If you think of some of the horses like Bay Shah and all the horses of Gamey and Gazon breeding, and Racine is really a tremendous worldwide influence. One of the things that I want to do today is to emphasize that in evaluating, for example, Skowronek as a sire line, we've said his success was in conjunction with the Cravat mares, and then again his sons that we're going to talk about, which will be mostly Racine and Raffles, we evaluate in terms of their own dams. because in thinking about pedigrees and thinking about breeding horses, one of the simple, really simple basic things that you can miss is that they always have two parents. And it's unfair on the face of it to present any photo of Rhea, and I know that, and I apologize to Rhea, but she was foaled at New Buildings in 1915, and horses were starving to death on all sides, and she did quite well to grow up, leave alone the fact that she didn't get through with a slightly unbalanced conformation, and you can see damaged joints here. You can see that she's doing quite well at this point in her life, but she's had a hard time in the past. But you can also see where Racine got that elegant reach of neck. You can see why Racine of the Scoronic sons is the one who tended to sire a really high-set tail. This, in some circles, Rhea is a joke horse, but Rhea was not a joke. Rhea was 50% responsible for the success of Racine, and no, I'm not going to let you forget it. This is her dam, Riata, by Massoud out of Rosemary, who did not have so many problems in her life, and until she got into her middle age, she died of twisted intestine. So her only breeding offspring is Rhea. She's the second dam of Racine. And you can really see this stamp of horse. This is Rosemary. I mean, these three mares belong together. This one had the environmental trauma that affected her. But this is certainly half of Racine. I mean, I don't, maybe I'm running out into the ground, but you sure see mares like that still today from this breed. We'll just run through some Racine offspring here. Gamori out of Carafa, who was a Burton granddaughter, so he's related to Racine in that direction. Mahaba out of a Davenport Hamidi mare, quite different breeding, a complete outcross, unlike Carafa. Serene, again, quite different. His dam was by Skoronic. So he's a double grandson of Skoronic with the Polish mares, the Kravet mares, Rhea and Sardana, for his granddad. And we all remember this picture from the 60s. This is the Serene Stallion Surf. Just as a reminder, this is the kind of horses that we got into this about. And again, I really see those Rosemary, Riata, Rhea. This is a double Racine mare, Scorata. Her dam was by Racine. And she's got multiple lines to Rustum, the sire of Rhea, but there they are. Sorry about the corner there, but this is Persine, who has been Persine and Serene and Ronick are the three really influential Racine stallions in pedigrees. And this one, in terms of the direct sire line, has been the most widely influential. He is out of Perda, so he's doubled back to Rustum, the sire of Rhea. So quickly through some Persine offspring. This is Saki, 3/4 Kravet, 1/4 Davenport, with the Chedan line that we talked about yesterday. Again, line bred to Perda, since her dam was by Piranha. Balsena. This produced some important horses for the McCoys, bred back to the Mid-Sahara Persine line. Again, an outcross. Her dam was by Ala Amor out of Bala, and also produced Abla, who should have been mentioned in the Northwest presentation yesterday, but didn't. But classy quality mares here. Bernine, an important siring son of Racine, out of a Racine daughter, but then an outcross dam line going to Waduda on the bottom. The mare was almost all down, but he was a double Racine grandson. His daughter, Sarah Jean, a double granddaughter of Persine. This is getting into the McCoys Mid-Sahara family here. Her full brother, Ferzan, again very influential, and we're going to see numerous of his descendants today. Ferzan really has two mainline branches. His very early son, possibly his first son, I don't remember, Gazon, was a bay horse of a slightly taller stamp and founded in his own characteristic group of horses. Well, Ferzan, among the Gainey program itself, with horses like Gay Rouge and Gay Parada, went off in another slightly different direction, crossing with Ferzan Azrath, as opposed to the Gazon, which went on Did very well in draft daughters, for example. Raffles has an older horse in winter coat, but this shows the finish and the brightness and the upstanding carriage and a lot of things that were liked about this horse. He's different from Racine. It's a little difficult to get pictures of Rapala, but this is not a bad presentation, given if you can sort her out of the chairs and paintings. Really, Raffles is unique among the Scoronic sons, of course, because he was 75% Scoronic, breeding the horse back to his daughter Rapala. To me, judging from as much as I can tell about Rapala from her photos, Raffles was almost more like her than he was like his sire. Again, there's a little bitty picture of Rapala off on the corner in her Wentworth pedigree. I'm almost afraid to say it out loud, but I think I'm tracking down the original of that picture. So we may have quite a good confirmation study of Rapala at Kravitz as a young man. Rapala's dam Risla is in Raffles. This is something to Raffles was 75% Scoronic, but he's also 25% Risla. And that links up with other things, Risla being tremendously influential in almost all Kravitz-influenced pedigrees, and ties up when Raffles is crossed to Abu Farwa, when Raffles is crossed to the Rosanthus line, when Raffles goes to, of course, Rislick's breeding, to other modern Kravitz lines, when you cross those horses to Russian breeding. Risla comes back again and again. And the thing about Risla, which is fascinating, is that you can't seem to get too much of her, unlike some lines. So we're going to see some Raffles offspring here. This was his youngest son, Soteb, out of a Zarif daughter, who was out of a Racine daughter. So there's an outcross Egyptian, outcross Davenport on the bottom line, but it's also Raffles crossed back to Racine. Again, I said yesterday, it's hard to get pictures of hen raffs, so I'm really glad. I should again have mentioned yesterday, this Northwest presentation would have had about half as many pictures as it did if Cliff Wilhelmsen had loaned us a collection of old magazines that had this picture, among others, in it. I think they're in here too. Again, hen raff, out of a Hanad daughter, and showing the very strong Davenport influence, which he bred on in some of his line as well. A tremendous mare sire of this horse. And if history had been a little different, probably would have. He had some fine sons that would have done stronger male lines. A little different stamp of horse. Again, more Risla and another line to her three-quarter brother Ribal on the bottom. This is Raffi by Raffles out of Imagita. There was, of course, a famous family of horses from that cross. Several grays, one bay and one chestnut. The grays very similar. I knew the two Jita and Raf Jita, full sisters, very well. They were just feminine versions of this. Very refined horses. Here's the bay brother Imarat. Much more like Raffles, even though he's bay and the others were gray. Another interesting thing, which I should mention, is Raffles carried the Scoronic bay gene, which we always think Scoronic as he was a homozygous gray horse. But there's a bay gene comes in there. And this is a bay horse carrying that gene since he's crossed a chestnut. The Raffles story would not have happened, of course, without Jimmy Dean. So here's Jimmy Dean with the inbred Raffles son, Raffi, whose second dam was Karima by Nassim. So this was one of the handful of highest percentage Scoronic horses ever bred. Yes? Okay, the first one we had, the very light spare horse was Raffi out of the Vegeta. This very substantial horse is Raffey, the inbred Raffles son. And this was Jimmy Dean's head stallion for many years, as is appropriate, since Jimmy Dean would have to have the highest percentage Scoronic stallion, or nobody else could, surely. Tremendous. Okay, this is Jim, a full three-quarter brother to Raffi, with the Mirage influence, since his dam, of course, was by Mirage out of Karima. They're alike and they're different. And this was the only stallion by Raffles out of a Mirage daughter that lived to grow up. And he, in turn, became the head sire at the Selby stud, because if anybody was going to have a Raffles son out of a Mirage daughter, it had to be Selby stud. This is Jimmy Wrench's stallion, Rala, who was a full brother to Hanraff that we talked about, by Raffles out of a Hanad daughter. And I'm glad to get a chance to talk about Jimmy Wrench because I think I learned about him very late in life, and I expect if I ran into him that late in the game, many people have never heard of him at all. And he was very well known in a very quiet way. He used desert influences and Skaronic, a follower of both Raswan and of the Skaronic breeding, which is not your standard pattern, really. This is Indy, out of a non-Skaronic mare in Dea, who was full brother to Indian Magic's dam. And I think in this horse you see a little more resemblance to Indian Magic than you do in his brother Indraf. This was the first Raffles son in the stud book, and he is very widespread in pedigrees. Of course, he was the foundation stallion of Almara, and their whole program was built around him. RJ and I have an ongoing discussion about the historical period when you had to have one sire, and there was one sire, and you did that sire. And if your mares didn't cross with him, they went down the road, and then you inbred that sire, and so on. And that was a historical period. I don't think anyone did that on purpose, although certainly among other people, Jimmy Dean had tremendous influence on putting that idea about. But that was also done at the King Ranch, and that's how they founded the King Ranch quarter horses and the son of Gertrude's cattle. And so that was a historical phase in livestock breeding. But Indra is also, for example, he's the sire of Gazon's dam, and Gazon was bred to an Indra daughter to get Rathon and Gazraf and Gabadraf and a whole string of important horses. So he's very widespread, not only in Almara pedigrees or directly influenced Almara pedigrees. This is Raffles bred to a full sister to Indraf and Indy. This is Rapture. Again, the Skaronic bay, even though the bay crapped mare was on the bottom, Rafflo was chestnut. This, of course, was another important site for R.B. Field in the Northwest, then went to Almara, and then went to Xanadu in Wisconsin. Arif, Raffles out of the straight Mainsboro mare, Ara, was one of a string of really stunning full siblings bred by the Tormelins at Ben-Hur. Another one is Arath, and this is one of my favorite illustrations of the Risla coming back out. Again, Ara was by a son of Ribal, who was three-quarter brother to Risla, and her dam was by Rizvan, so this thing just sort of made a little pyramid and popped back out in this line of breeding. Arath was bred to another of those full siblings, where he was bred repeatedly to both of his full sisters, Aratha and Arafla. And of course, this is the most famous product of that. This is Louisfield Sun God, who unfortunately was badly foundered as a young horse and didn't have as many foals as would like to have seen. But that, in the direction that was going of those Ben-Hur, Raffles, Ara horses, not surprisingly, since this is all he is inbred on that, is probably the ultimate expression of it. And certainly one of the lovely horses of his day. This, I did check the markings. This is Sheikh, not Shayar. Again, part of the Northwest presentation, but also a Raffles son. This cross Raffles on a daughter of the desert-bred stallion Saud out of Davenport mare. And since Charles is here, that mare, yes, had a line of Domel, so she wasn't straight Davenport. Was one of the really important crosses at the Selfie stud, and her daughter Rathbara then went on to be to found the most important family for Alice Payne's Assil Arabians, where of course Raffles was inbred with some Racine and intensely Skaronic horses bred. Coming out with horses sometimes look quite a lot like this. Cassandra was a very famous daughter of Raffles. Most of her foals were by Rapture. She also had Jemima by Hanrap, and then in her old age she went to Almara and was bred to Almara Redan, I believe Shalimar Jeebus and several other horses there. Raffles out of a Mirage granddaughter out of the Egyptian mare Rhoda, who was by the same sire as Nazir. I like to, and since I talk about the dams, I also like to remember that there are daughters of stallions as well as sons, but it's a lot easier to get pictures of the stallions because they're advertised as stud all the time. Azrath by Raffles out of Asjapur. And an interesting concept which RJ introduced me to is that Asjapur was not really a Polish mare because she has no Polish traditional founder animals in her pedigree. She is has Lyle and Marbach and I think some Babylon and other European sources, but she was not actually of Polish breeding, even though Henry Madison bought her in Poland. And this, of course, has been a tremendously influential stallion, probably the most influential Raffles son, especially as a sire line, and combining with the Verzon horses. And you can see the similarities and the differences, how that would be a logical kind of combination that someone would try and see why it would work. You can't really talk about Raffles without talking about Mirage, who was the desert stallion that came through Crabbit and either was or was not used in England. There's some discussion on that point, since the foals are in the stud book as by Miraz, but Peter Upton makes a case that they were by Mirage, and Lady Wentworth pen-slipped when she reported it in a lucky fashion, since Mirage wasn't registered, Miraz was. So this horse did not sire as many foals as Raffles in this country, but he sired, again, really impressive horses, and the great nick at Selby's was Raffles on Mirage daughters. In fact, we had when Lois Perry was looking at the pedigrees for the Crabbit Symposium in Denver, the World Symposium, she said, "Why is this horse in here? Because it doesn't have any Mirage in it, even though it was all Selby. Because at Selby's they thought of Selby breeding as Raffles with Mirage. This is Indraj, half-brother to Indraf and Indy, but by Mirage. Again, has been quite widespread in pedigrees. I knew a lot of his horses because he was in Virginia. And this Idol by Mirage out of Selma, both, by the way, out of Selby imported Crabbit mares, was one of the last Mirage sons used. I actually got to see direct offspring of this horse as young horses and kind of watched them grow up. So this, obviously, very much the stamp of Mirage himself. You can't talk about Raffles without talking about the Double R program, which ties in with the GSB breeding from yesterday, but has gone on and become a direction of its own. This is Elmar Canadian Beau. He is by Ranix, the Rislix horse we talked about yesterday. His dam is by Indra out of Rapture Daughter out of Cassandra. So obviously he's a very important way that these Raffles horses that we just talked about have gone on, crossed back particularly to other Raffles horses. Almar Count Pine by Count D'Orsay, the other Rislix son, out of Indraf Daughter, out of the Rislix daughter Thorea. So this horse is straight Crabbit and would qualify as a GSB Arabian if we were talking about it in that context, but he's also a show horse and sire that's been important in the Double R program. Really historical Mulder photo here when the horses were still at the Reese Ranch in Chino. This is Abu Parwa, and that's Racine down the hill thinking about it. The handler is Gordon Lemons, who worked with these horses and trained Milan, and so has been an important figure in the history of this breeding. This shows a lot of what Abu Parwa is about as a horse and a breeding influence. There's tremendous carriage, this beautiful character and style, another kind of beautiful ears here. He was a tremendously impressive horse with this imposing presence. I have seen few horses with such presence, and he was 31 when I saw him. And interestingly, not many people know this, but if you went to the stall with Abu Farwa and rubbed his gums, he would lean against you and all but go into ecstasy and pick up his hind foot and just lean into you and lean into you and lean. And he actually fell down once doing that because he loved his gums rubbed, as I know from personal experience. Rubbing their gums, by the way, is a team technique. It really hooks into the horse's mind, which we know now and nobody knew then. This is Abu Farwa as a bit older horse. This is rather fun and unique. This was taken by Rick's father, so it's not something that anybody's ever seen a lot of. Again, it shows an old horse who's down at the back, but it shows his structure, the tremendous length of neck, and the carriage and expression that he had is just tremendous character and force that you just were in the presence of something when you saw this. As with all horses, he had two parents, since we're talking, this is a pedigree in historical sense. He was by Gravius, who was the last foal bred by Mainsboro and was actually foaled with Kellogg. The mare came out from there in foal to Rayhaus. We'll see Rayhaus in the Blaster presentation tomorrow. We'll see a slide of Rayhaus, we will not see him. So we turned the generations pretty quickly. Blaster was young when he sired Rayhaus. Rayhaus, in one of his early crops, got Rabius. Rabius, I believe, was 4 when Abu Farwa was sired. And they all stepped back and said, my golly, look what we got here. And then went on using that for 30 years, which worked real well. You can see there is similarity and there is difference between Abu Farwa and Rabius. They certainly are the overall the same look of horse. Rabius, not only his shoulder lays back a bit more, his withers are higher, but Abu Farwa has a longer hindquarter. And they're quite a lot alike, and there's more beauty in Abu Farwa. This, of course, is Rabiat. This is one of the key mares in Arabian breeding, in CMK breeding, in whatever you care to name. Clearly, this is a mare that took to that style of showmanship, and that's why they liked her so well at Kellogg's at the time. But she was also just a really classy mare. This is Risletta. You can see, again, she's very like Abu Farwa. If you didn't have the one picture, you'd say, golly, he's just like the mare. And if you didn't have the other picture, you'd say, golly, he's just like the sire. He's not just like either. He's the son of the two. And, however, they are similar enough that it gives you some indication of why Abu Farwa went forward in such a definite direction. The interesting thing about Abu Farwa, because he is such a well-documented breeding horse, is that you can pick out Rabius horses and Risletta horses. They don't all fall so neatly into category. Really talk about Abu Farwa without talking about the Reese Circle and that Southern California kind of breeding. And a thing that occasionally crosses my mind, and I seldom have occasion to say, but I think it's important to make the point, we're coming into things nowadays, the way the Arabian breed is, the way the world is, with our preservation slant, and we look back on what people have done in the past, and they think, gosh, they were breeding our kind of horse, they were breeding Abu Farwa, they were in this tremendous Reese Circle, and that was so wonderful. And now some of those same people, or the people who have their stock, aren't doing it anymore, they have betrayed us. And that really, of course, isn't what they're doing. We wish they had gone on differently, and we wish we had access to some of the things that are being used differently. But the Reese Circle was the kind of horse you bred in that place in that time. They weren't doing it to be different. They were doing it because it was what they were doing. That's kind of subtle, but they didn't. When things evolved, it wasn't really a betrayal in that sense. It was just a different approach came into style. Anyway, this is Al Amour, and Abu Farwa was bred a lot to Al Amour daughters because
This battery is not on.
well, because they were two Reese sires and they know how that worked. This is Antez, another photo of the same horse that RJ had, of course, straight down the Ford's Stallion. He and his sons, Ankar and Gazan, were major players in this Reese Circle, and Gazan daughters went into the Skyline program, for example, and were tremendously important. And the Gazan son, Galahad, at the Caldwell Ranch, used on Abu Farwa for seeing mares, was an important way that the Reese Circle went on. And the last trad is that. So it's interesting. A lot of what we think of as Kellogg breeding, of course, is, but the way it came down to us is through the Reese horses, the Reese cooperator breeders, of which Skyline was another circle that carried on another generation, but it was not Kellogg doing all this itself. It was a lot of people working together to get this done. But looking at the Abu Farwa horses, you have to remember many of them are going to have Al Amour or Antez or both behind them, and so that's another stamp that shows up. This is Shahzada as a young horse. He was, I think, a tremendous breeding horse that doesn't get recognized as much as he should. He is by Abu Farwa out of the Antez granddaughter, Surab, who was by Latif, the only breeding offspring of Antez from his Polish career. Abu Baha, his full brother, as a mature champion stallion. Again, Abu Farwa and Antez granddaughter with Ronik on the dam side, which is a horse that I will talk about more in the Kellogg tomorrow rather than he didn't get into the Racine this morning. Tamerlane by Abu Farwa out of Ripna's daughter. We'll talk about Ripna's more in the ORAB presentation. Again, he was left out of Kellogg because he's going to come into that. Abu Parwa was only 4 when he sired this horse, and this was the show horse of his day, halter and action champion that did most everything. And he is certainly in pedigrees, and we'll see his descendants. He didn't have as many foals as his prominence might lead you to expect. Also, Abu Parwa on a Rifmus daughter, this time with Shilan, the Antes daughter, as the second dam. This is Galan, U.S. top 10 halter horse and a major action champion, quite an important sire, and we'll see descendants of him today. Farlane, by Abu Parwa out of an Al-Amawar daughter, again with Rifmus, and out of a half-sister. The next dam was a half-sister to Ronix. So, again, these pedigrees just tie together. This horse went through Hillcrest in Wisconsin, although you think of that as a Raffles breeder predominantly. Went to Canada and lived out his days in Canada. You look around, you will see that handler. We are presenting the horses as a subgroup, but of course they really belong together. This is Gazai by Abu Parwa out of the straight Mainsboro mare. He is different from many of those resources that I talked about. He doesn't have any Davenport. He doesn't have Al-Amawar or Antes. The success of these horses is in halter, and they made lovely Western horses. And you can see the beautiful chiseled face and quality that this guy had. And you can see, obviously, why people liked him. Here he is as a foal. We've been talking about these mares. Surely having a mare like that behind you, literally as well as genetically, was a big plus for anybody. That's Gazna. She was by Cheppy Noyan out of Basilic daughter, straight Mainsboro, as I said. His full sister, Gazala. His daughter, Ganissa. This shows that very pretty arch to the neck, which made them pretty Western horses, but it also was one thing that people really liked about the Gazai horses. Swain, her full brother, he's in a lot of pedigrees. He proved a really good mare sire. You can't talk about Abu Parwa without Al-Amawar and Antes, you cannot talk about Gazai without Bint Halu and Fain. They were the two mares that made 75% of his successful offspring, or his most regarded offspring, are out of them. Bint Halu is by Camille, the Raval son that we talked about yesterday, out of the Harris mare. We haven't talked about Harris horses very much, but in the Robbie and Heidi talked about Harris breeding yesterday in the endurance presentation, because those are really solid using horses. But Tizwan, for example, there were some really good Gazai, Bint Halu, handsome dark chestnut horses. She also had a really good Rasawi by Hanrat. We're talking about the Hanrat sons that didn't breed on as much as you'd expect. That was one of them. Abu Baha was also bred to Hanrat daughters with great success, which should have been mentioned. The mare on the right, Fain, is by the Farana son Fade out of Kishta, who was by the Davenport and Midi stallion Akil, and out of Telestin, whom we talked about yesterday, Fedger's daughter by the Yashmak. So this is double bred to that Faluka Grabbit family. And this is the dam of Swain and Ganissa and Gaineen, and so many horses whose names you recognize if I had them on the tip of my tongue. But these mares both cross beautifully with Gazai. This is Riada again, second dam of Racine, dam of Rhea, out of Rosemary, the Rodanian daughter. This is Risala, out of a Rodanian granddaughter, who was the only breeding offspring. Does that like it work? Good. Risala was out of Rida, who also produced some important horses by Astrolith. Rida was the only breeding offspring of Murzuk, one of the Ali Pasha Sharif stallions that was exported to Africa pretty soon after he got to Crabbit. And there is quite a distinctive stamp, of course, that breeds down from that. But again, you can also see this mare is related to Riada. Of course, this is Akuzay, out of an Azraq daughter, out of a Kar's daughter. Again, certainly his own horse, certainly a Mas'ud son. He is the main source of Kar's influence in pedigrees in the world. Pharaoh, out of the Ali Pasha Sharif mare Fulana, who was by Ibn Nura, the sire of Faysul, who was in pedigree Rasim. This, again, very distinctive horse, and it's fascinating. This is Sir James Penn-Bucco, who started Australian Arabian breeding. There are two mare lines from the Bucco original blunt mares, one from the Nargile daughter, Namusa, and one from Elar and Donna, from the Donna family. And in each case, those are widely branched, extensive families, but in each case, much the most important mare was the Pharaoh daughter out of that family, which is quite fascinating. Nargile, the dam of Nasik and Nuruddin and Nasima, out of Nafisa, again. These horses are all related, but they are all themselves with the character from their other partner. Masoud was bred several times to Bint Helwa, the famous broken-legged mare. Lady Anne referred to Masoud and Bint Helwa in one place as brother and sister, or blood brother and sister. The breeding is very close. They're both Bayezidis, and the dams were either blood sisters or niece and aunt, depending on which reference you read. But anyway, they're very close and doubled and redoubled in the same Ali Pasha Sharif strain and family from the Abbas Pasha stud. And she breeds on through two offspring. Harb was bred to Rose of Sharon, the second dam of Risala, before she came over here, and his only breeding offspring in pedigrees is Rodan. And because we're talking about Galastra, Rodan is very important. He was the sire of Galastra's dam. Hamasa, the full sister to Harb, produced several foals that are in pedigrees. The important one today is going to be Hasna, who came to Mainsborough and produced Ghaziat there, that was sold to Traveller's Rest, and she produced Nafud, the dam of Islam. But these two horses are their own little corner of the Masoud breeding, perhaps because they're redoubled in the same pedigree elements, perhaps or partly by chance, partly by pedigree indication. They are like their dam, they're like their sire, they're very like each other. And I think, as we look at the modern Masoud descendants, this picture to me was really informative. These chestnut Bint Helwas are a real aspect of the Masoud horses and of our Galastra breeding. Queen of Sheba, of course, was also bred to Masoud. She was the most prized of the blunt desert mares. Lady Anne called her the best producer at Crabbit in her Azarite cross before Masoud came along. She had several Masoud offspring. Her important one in pedigrees, or the one in pedigrees, is Astrolith, the sire of Galastra. Again, you can see the sire, you can see the dam. They always had two parents. Astrolith bred back to the Queen of Sheba line, got very much the same stamp of horse, a smoother, raised in western fed conditions, not raised in the desert, but much the Queen of Sheba stamp of horse. That was Sotam. This is his sister Salima. They're both double Queen of Sheba. They were both crossed back to Queen of Sheba and other lines in their breeding career. Rustum is a three-quarter brother to Risala, the stretchy chestnut mare we had at the start. He's like her. He's different from her. Male and female, different pedigrees, not surprising, but sometimes we have to state the obvious just because we don't always think about it as we're going along. But Rustum and these other brother and sister, Sotam and Salima, were different from Galastra, who was really much more like Harb and Hamasa. Of course, we don't intend to be surprised by this. His dam was double bred in that breed, weight condition and so on. This is back at Mainsborough. This probably is my favorite image of Galastra and one of my favorite photos. This picture has been published as Gulnar and as Gulmora. It was in contemporary references as both mares at one time or another. Personally, I believe this is Gulmora. So I guess for our purposes that just means these mares were alike and we can get the family stamp even if we're not quite certain which one is which. Her sire Rodan was by Harb the Mas'ud bin Helwa's son, and out of Rose of Sharon, who was the second dam of Risala and Rustum. And he is more like Risala than Rustum, I feel. He's also very like the Chestnut sisters to Rustum, Rim and Rayala. This is a very important early image and a very important early breeding horse in setting the Mainsboro stamp and then spreading widely into what became North American and then CMK pedigrees. This is the Mainsboro shoulder and withers. This is the spare finish. There was some work done to get a little more bone under them, but this stamp of horse is really quite important and still quite visible here today, let alone other places. Gulnar's dam Ghazala was bred by Anastasia Sharif, was sold to the Blunts at her dam's side, was sold to Spencer Borden, went briefly through England, and then came here and was the most important foundation mare of Borden's stud. He owned two of the most important Blunt mares, Rose of Sharon and Ghazala also. And it was the combination of the two that gave Gulnar the dam of Galastra. Ghazala must resemble her sire Ibn Sharara as well as her dad Bint Helwa because her chestnut line harks back much more to Bint Helwa's Mas'ud poles than it does to the figure staff of her own appearance. This is Ghazala in Egypt, and her daughter Gadia and granddaughter Sarah were much more this stamp horse than the ones we got here as the Galastra and Hasna horses. Rehas, of course, is one of the most important breeding sons of Galastra, one of the most important breeding sons of anybody. This of course, is the sire of Rabius. This is the founder of the Abu Farwa line that we talked about yesterday. And again, you certainly can see this is part of that breeding group, and he was part of those horses that we saw yesterday. But we just treat them separately because they went on with their own distinctive character, and in terms of numbers and proportions and so on, they are a big group that we couldn't handle in with Galastra, really. Just too much going on. Robeta Galastra, from the very last Galastra crop. Rehas was the first Galastra crop. Robeta Galastra is the last. Again, very different mares, but certainly sons of the same sire. I did not get a slide of the yearling photo of Robeta Galastra. It would have been fascinating to do so because the maturity and the change in proportions and the drying out is just really instructive for the character of this line. This is kind of a silly little Galastra picture, but I like it, and it gives an aspect of his dynamic character, which was a really important part of Galastra. And it runs very handily into this next picture because Galastra's son Islam was really very like that picture of Galastra. I have been fascinated over the years how you can find pictures of a horse and he will have descendants that look like that picture. And you find another picture that, I mean, yes, it's the same horse, but you don't really pick them as being identical. And he's got other descendants that look like the other picture. They can show themselves, different aspects of themselves at different times. It's just fascinating. Meanwhile, Islam was out of Nafud, who was the daughter of Hasna, granddaughter of Hamasa, and not surprising that he clicked as a sire and was able to get a pretty consistent lot of horses. His daughter Islama was Pacific Slope champion. I wish I had a picture that showed her elegance. She really, when Islam was very old, I talked to someone who visited the Pain Ranch in Arizona and said, my word, Islam looks great today. I didn't think he looked this good at this age. Last time I saw him, he looked a lot older. And then the mare moved, and it was Islama. Islam's son, Venus, was one of his older sons, bred when he was in Oregon before the Pains had him. He is out of Islam's three-quarter sister, Bidni. Very distinctive, very much his own horse. Certainly like Islam, but he's like Nafud's sire, Negel. And he's like the horse Baslid that Nafud was bred to produce, Bini's dam Habiba. You can go back and fit him in with Islam just fine. But there's another thing going from this side. I mean, he's Vinny's son as well, even though Vinny and Islam were 3/4 related. And the other quarter, Baslett, was certainly the same breeding. I don't have very many photos of Islam either Islam or Venice offspring. This is quite an old mare. Her name is Hasna Venice. She's full sister to Royal Venice. This is a daughter of Royal Venice, Dynasty Royalette, out of a line-bred Abu Farwa mare. That seems to be Islam and Venice. So many of the Raffles lines that you think I was coming from the Selby study, if you go down, they went to California mare lines that were Kellogg or very strong to Kellogg. Quite interesting. Sotep and that mare Rosali we talked about yesterday, just many of them. The Kellogg program started in 1925 with the purchase of horses from Chauncey Clark. This was not one of them. This horse came a few years later, but they were Davenport and Hamidi breeding. Jadan was one of them that we talked about. This, of course, is Antez, who came from F.E. Lewis a few years later. And also in 1926, a very, very important group of horses came from Cravat. This is Mr. Kellogg himself at the transition point with the Cravat mare Rosanna on the left and the Clark mare Amham on the right. Amham came originally from Hingham in Massachusetts, was a Hamra daughter. And Rosanna is a Skoronic daughter. So that's sort of the hinge of an era going from the early desert breeding in North America into the Cravat breeding influenced by Skoronic. Those mares and Antez were Mr. Kellogg's favorite riding horses. And that's quite an old man. Rod, a very important mare at Bainsboro, produced Ray Haas there. Also went to Kellogg, where she was accompanied by her daughter Rob, who was another good producer. Rob with a B by Abu Zaid. This is Rod with a D by CD out of the Ridge of Daughter Ridgemount. So she's a granddaughter of Risala, the Basal daughter we started out with. You certainly can see that. CD was bred to another Cravat mare, Ramim, crossing back in the same family since Ramim and Risala were 3/4 sisters, and got Rehal, the first important Bainsboro red stallion. Rehal did not go to Kellogg, he went to Hearst, but his daughters were tremendously important at Kellogg. Starting, of course, with Rabiat, Ghaziat out of Hasna. So Ghaziat and Nafud were 3/4 sisters. Daughter Gazana was the dam of Gazan, who's back in the Skyline pedigrees, who's the Tyra of Anik that we're talking about in the last draft horses. Again and again, this mare. Rabiat somehow is more obvious. This one is more subtle, and she sneaks out at you when you start looking at the pedigrees. Rayek, by Rehal out of a Burke daughter, has been a tremendous action influence. She did not stay at Kellogg's very long, went to Hearst, but she left Scheherazade there. That mare produced some of the most influential racing horses. Rabiat, we saw yesterday, by Ray Haas, out of Rabiat. His most important son was Abu Farwa, but you certainly cannot say that horses like Damascus and Sabre and Ramlin, just wonderful horses, one after the other. Abu El-Ri, one of his younger sons that I knew quite well, was just a marvelous horse. And his daughters. I have always wondered if she realized what was going to happen when he went to the Rossin daughters, which she had never done at Cravat. Because when he was bred to Rifla and Farrison, the two Rossin daughters in the Kellogg importation, it was a whole new dynasty, a whole new aspect of Arabian breeding that is really central to CMK in many, many directions. I don't know how you can be central in many directions, but it's not a good one coming out. And is very influential in world pedigrees. He sired fine horses in England, but nothing he did in England worked the way that Rossendick did with those two mares. Berta was Lady Anne Lippard's mare, Lady Wentworth's daughter, but Lady Wentworth took her back for the Kellogg importation, which was Lady Anne's loss and certainly North America's gain, because this was an incredibly influential mare. She by the way, is by Russell, actually the son that we saw back on. An incredibly influential mare. Farrison, her daughter, came along with her. She was carrying Ferdinand. She had affiliate side Ferdisha. Those were all important breeding animals. Her foals in this country, Fertiland, Verdika, And then, of course, her second pick with Racine gave a good mare called Verdina, and then she was sold to the Vanderhoofs carrying the colt who grew up to be Racine, which started a whole new story. Her son, Burton by Nurdine, was a very important mare sire and also had some good sons. He's in a lot of pedigrees. We're going to run in this afternoon. His daughters just are all over the place. One thing, you remember the picture of Rabiat under English saddle. One thing about the Kellogg program was that it presented the horses as performing horses, which, as using horses, is something to ride and do things and do different things. And this, of course, is Farana. It's a little hard to evaluate this information here, but it's really important that they presented these horses this way. Horses could do things. These were not just kept to be keeping them. Farana was an incredible mare sire. He had fine sons that are in pedigrees and very highly prized, but his mares went all over the place. This is Yatana at Cedardale by Farana out of Ghaziat, and on the left is her daughter Mitabu, whose sire was out of a Kellogg mare, who was by the Egyptian Pharaoh. And Cedardale themselves said the success of Cedardale, which produced more national champions in the 60s and into the 70s than anybody else, is due directly to this one mare. Her brother, El Kamate, who I believe is 24-year-old, although he's in his 20s anyway, went to the Maris. He had been to Vanderhoofs and sired El Rana there, which was enough for a lot of horses. But he went to the Maris in his old age and started a whole new career and sired just a string of important horses there. And again, crossing with Racine. Nada by Farana out of the Scaronic daughter Nada. Loved the horse, which I rode in his old age. And I think that still must be the lightest mount that I ever saw on a horse. Just a touch, you were where you were going. And very much a blend of Farana and Scaronic, and quite reminiscent of Indian Magic, of course, who was the same female line, and again with the Scaronic influence. Two pictures that just go to prove that I didn't do this to make points for my horses, or our horses, or horses that I particularly like. Ronick and his son Aleph. Ronick's dam, Lorraine, who was bred by W.R. Brown, sent back to England in utero, and then purchased by Raswan, whom we didn't mention but should have, because he comes in very importantly in the Kellogg story. Part of the Kellogg importation. She was by Rizvan, half-brother to Rod, and out of Batla, who was a daughter of Razaz, the Astrolid son that we saw yesterday in the introductory part of the GSP group. This mare broke her leg, only produced 5 foals, but Ronick was a lot luckier, lived a lot longer. Another horse who traveled all over the country. He also stood the traveler's rest where he sired Aleph out of a half French mare. We're going to talk about French horses when we get to the Orac picture. And Aleph went back to Kellogg's because they didn't have a chestnut Racine stallion, and Aleph cheerfully went back there and turned gray. But they kept it anyway. And he sired some really good horses there, such as Alifar, who was used a little bit at Kellogg's, was sold, and then sold to Arthur Godfrey, which was great in terms of promotion, but not in terms of doing anything. He only has 6 foals in the stud books, just a couple of them bred on, although we talked about Ferdith in connection with Abu Barwa yesterday. Ferdith had a colt by this horse who was used in Colorado, and is not as prominent as he should be, judging from one mare I've seen and another 1 or 2 daughters I've seen pictures of. But this horse ended his days at Louisfield. He was a wonderful, kind, willing riding horse, and he was bought for Mrs. Lewis and gelded. And I didn't see him until after he was gelded, which is a great pity, because I sure would have ridden. And I get my hands on him. But we used to, one of my early memories is stopping on the way out the road at Louisfield to talk to Alfar, because Mrs. Lewis never did get over being afraid of horses, so he was gelded really to no purpose. Another Aleph son. This one is a very personal thing with us, because this is how the Trommerhausen's and his family got started with Arabians in Colorado. It was breeding handhairs with this horse. This is Lutan by Aleph out of Morejas daughter. And you can see the Rodan through Aleph, the Rizvan the Rayhaus, and more Rodin on the bottom, has come out with quite a not a racine, Skoronic looking horse, but back to the Mainsboro horse. This was another tremendous moving horse. His sister, Malifa, stayed at Kellogg's through the remount and came to Cal Poly. And this is her daughter, Kulipa, one of the last of the really Kellogg mares. She was a tremendous action mare. I believe she was used as a polo pony, as was Rabiat. She was by Courier, and she really is much his stamp of horse. But she has bred on quite well, and we have one of her great-grandsons here today.
Now, she has an extreme head, and it doesn't show in
It never shows in pictures. I have a slide from Marjorie, or I'm sorry, I have a print of a slide from Marjorie which shows it much better. But as I say, famous story about running out of film before I got to the end. Right. The Courier heads tended to be plain, and I guess she didn't want to embarrass him because she sure photographed like she was another one. Horab lived in Katie Matthias' backyard until he was 13. Matthias was a Charro rider and Palomino breeder and ran a dude ranch. Sandy Warren just gave me a fascinating thing yesterday, an article from an old Arabian Horse News about the Matthias horses as a dude strain. He had some great horses, some part Arabs, some part Arabs by Olani. So he had some Antes breeding because of the wonderful Antes disposition for these dudes to pack around on. And that was his main focus. He was a founding member of the North American Charro Association. And through some, I don't know who started it, which direction the overture came from, I would love to know. Matthias leased some Arabian mares from the Hurwitz and bred Rabna and Narla and Kazaran and a couple others to Olani, who was a middle-aged horse by that time. He had sired Palomino's and sired Charro horses, but not breeding Arabian mares, at least where they got registered. Although, as I say, he did show him, he raced him. I would love to have seen this at the Pomona show one year. Rasraff was first in Western Pleasure, and Olani was second, and it had to look like Mutt and Jeff when they went up for service. And this is one of the foals, one of the two that Matthias kept. This is Oreb, out of Rabna. He's only 13 or 14 here, which is one of the younger photos and one of the few photos under saddle that I could get. I mean, there are some snapshot type photos of him standing in his tent at Matthias, but in terms of being in condition and ready to have your picture taken, this is as far back as I go. And this is a few years later. But he's a middle-aged horse in the first picture, let alone in this one. Tremendous structure and this very upright horse. Just, that was one thing, the neck coming straight off the shoulder, and yet not getting in his way when he went to do things. The strength in the hindquarter and the way the muscling runs down the typhoon gasket, I think is quite notable. Again, that was one of my favorite horses, so I don't pretend that I look at him as if he were under a microscope. This is his grandsire Ripnus, the sire of Olani. You can certainly see the character here, the uprightness, Ripnus was always criticized for being leggy. He is a young horse here, but yes, there is some error. He doesn't have as much rib and as much body as Oreb. This uprightness comes from many different sources. One that I had never really thought about until I went with Nasik, who sired Ripnus. There it is, really. And that tremendous shoulder, tremendous definition that this mare had. I wish we had, she had 21 foals, and I wish we had about 18 of them in pedigrees, because that is just such a valuable trait. The Ripnus grandson, been Bashied by Gasnus, but he's got that Ripnus carriage and so on about him. Ripnus grandson, El Sirocco, out of a Rifage daughter, so you get Risla on that side, and Ronick down on the bottom, and we're tying into French breeding again. I keep saying we're going to talk about French breeding. Hot Shot, a double Ripnus horse by Tejas, who was out of Ripnus' daughter. The daughter of Tamerlane, who was out of Ripnus' daughter. Of course, In this company, I don't talk about white marking because we're too sophisticated to worry about that sort of thing. But Ripnus lived at a time, and his guest lived at a time when that was a tough thing for a horse to carry off, and you find Ripnus more often through daughters. Greenacre Sage double Ripnus through the mare Seati, who was the dam of Galan and the second dam of Sage's home dam, Greenacre's Gina. We saw a slide of Galan yesterday, and here's a double Seati, double Ripnus. We'll see, of course, the Sage Colt in the ORAC presentation today. This was brand new to me, and this, again, thanks to Cliff Williamson, his old magazine collection. This is Olani. I believe this was taken at that Pomona show, where I won't try to get through the whole thing, but he was second in Western Pleasure, and he won the walking race and second in the trotting race, and first or second in the parade class. It was quite fun, but this was a new picture to me. And again, this tall stamp of horse, not the body and the rib and the hindquarter really that Orab had, but certainly the same style of horse overall. And this is the other side. This is Ravna. Has been very difficult to get photos of Ravna because she was a backyard broodmare. She was shown in gymkhana classes at one point in her life, but
just to kind of explain, because she looks really high in the air, where she's standing was a gentle upslope.
Sure, yeah, she is on a hill here. This is at Matthias, right?
Yes, that was
Okay.
the guy
This, the Hurlbuts got started with Narzig and Rabkal, who were two Hurst-bred horses. Rabkal was an inbred daughter of Rehal, out of a daughter of Alastra and Rabiat. And Narzig was by the Mainsborough sire Ghazi, who was by Rodin out of Gamura, who we may have seen a picture of. And his dam was full sister to Purana and another one of those Nasik-Rasim crosses from the Farrison there. And they bought the mare with two foals outside and carrying this one, and I make absolutely no claim in the world that this is not my favorite family in the breed, because it is. So don't expect me to put them under a microscope. And this is their full brother, who stood with his sire at Hurlbuts for a while before they discovered Wheatheads and sort of changed direction in that way. But I think putting these three pictures together, you can see another aspect that went into Orab in addition to Alani, and I think each side needed the other. Although, I don't know, that's one of those horses Charles talks about, that if you change anything, it would be worse as far as I'm concerned. This also is the record holder for Iranian longevity. Even though he's only a great-great-grandson of Alastra, he lived to be 38. Here we are with the French horses. This is Fenzile, the dam of Polyad. She's by Rodin. She's out of the French mare Balpiste II. She's the dam of Polyad, who produced Olani and Ziadi and Pollyanna and Sham, I think. I mean, just a bunch of horses and useful, good horses all of them. Folly, oh, lovely mare, Folly by Abu Farwell's son out of this mare. There is a definition and a spare quality that comes through these Mainsborough French lines that I think we recognize and we value, but we don't necessarily know where it came from. And I'm trying to make a point that it's coming from here. This is Fadi by the Mainsborough sire Sargon out of Kola. This actually is the third dam of El Sirocco. And I think she could easily be his dam. Looking at this picture, remembering one of him. Again, half French, different Maryland. Baccarum, one of the most highly regarded sons of Alain Aberward, out of a French mare from the same family as Fenzile, but I believe a half-sister or else a daughter of that mare. It's not quite in my head at the moment. Again, look at the arch of the neck, the light, spare quality. He's not quite as defined as Fenzile, but then Rodin was so intense for that, you would expect it to be more accentuated there. Babiat is by Sidi, the sire of Rihal and Rad, and out of Baraza, another Kraven import, who was by Razaz. So Astrolith comes in here again. He was bred to Benzeli in Wyoming and produced Polyat, who Polyat is owned at this point in his life by Mrs. Morrill, but he started out with Eleanor Erdman, who became Eleanor Donnelly, and called her program Folly Ranch, and I figure she liked Polyat a lot because she gave her that name. This is Khalid, the sire of Sidi, the grandsire of Babiat. This still comes out in these horses. I mean, that is a handsome horse. We get that kind of handsome horse. This is Orev's son Ben Rabba. I did not collect a bunch of Orev's sons and daughters because we're getting up into modern times and it would be kind of invidious as to who got put in and who got left out. But Ben Rabba has his own subgroup today, so he's here. I am very proud that I took that picture at Santa Maria when he was the Pacific Slope Reserve champion, and I won't say how many years ago. I have some lovely pictures that Lisa Faulkner took that day as well. This one I took at El Rancho Marmonte after Ben came back from England. This is about 1980, 81, 82, sorry, because we had, speaking of Lutat, we had Ludara down there ready to Ben for an 1883 foal. And this Ann took at our place in Davis when we had been there when he was 23, the last season that we were trying to breed him. No, I'm sorry, this is the year we did successfully breed him. He was back there 2 years later. But, I don't know, when I write up the pedigrees on our horses, I say Ben Rabba, either I go on for pages or I don't say anything. So that's how I feel about it. I mean, this is what do you say about a horse that looks like that, and then the sire record that he has in North America and in Europe, and offspring in Africa, and sold to Saudi Arabia, South America, just all over the place, Israel. This is Jimmy Wrench's stallion Rala, who was a full brother to Hanrap that we talked about by Raffles out of a Hanad daughter. This Raffles and that board. And Rala, bred to a brown Zarif daughter, got this horse who, the evidence of this photo notwithstanding, was intensely shiny blue-black. His name is Sorol, and he was the first Arabian I ever saw. And I think it is one of life's extraordinary coincidences that he had been the sire of Rollica all that time. I didn't know it until many years later when I learned about Rollica. He stood in California for years and then went back east and ended up actually died about 5 miles from my home in Maryland, although I had known him for years before that. We used to see him at the open shows. He had that tremendous carriage and bearing, and of course this tremendous length of hind quarter. He handed to his daughter Rollica, and she gave to her son Ben. This is Rollica. This is a Chris Massey photo, and if I remember how old Kate Eagle was, I can tell you how old Rollica was, but I don't today. Just this is much more flattering to the mare than it is the foal, just for the sake of it. That filly grew up to be Region 3 champion side saddle and Halter English Western champion. She was a lovely little mare. This is Rollica at 29. Really, really lovely mare of character. This is very like Olani and rather like Ben. This is the full brother to Rollica's Ben. And I think the Rollica horses tend to resemble him more than they do Kolani, who's actually in their pedigree. This is Narlani. And he was bred, again, a double ripness mating, bred to the Tamerlane daughter, Astralane, who was out of the great racing mare, Pomona Astral. And their daughter, Mid Sharif, one of several good horses from that cross, was, I believe it was Region 3. Ben was champion stallion, and Mid Sharif was reserve champion mare. And Mid Sharif was bred to Zadir, who must come into the Ben Rabba and Oreb story because of the importance of that nick. That just went beautifully, that combination. Anyway, Sharif was bred to Zadir to produce Mid Shazadi, and Mid Shazadi bred to Ben Rabba had Ariba. Went on in the same show direction as his relatives. Relatives there at Region 3 that day. So that's, again, I can either go on all day with these or stop somewhere, so I stopped. Georgia?
Can we see what all the these?
Sure.
Everybody was doing it all.
Okay. Well, I can't resist if you like that question. And again, sort of wish I had the Rowlett slide next to this because I think it really illustrates it. I mean, there's a look there too. I mean, that is not unlike, but it's just fascinating how these things get tied together. And you can analyze them and say, well, yes, there's this. This really strongly has come down. And certainly looking at Orab and Venerable horses, because we're here, I will say we have this filly's full sister at home, the last producing relic. And I guess we're up to our chase talk. So, any questions or thoughts or comments while we take a quick
We
break?
start with this mare, which was actually the first mare that Homer Davenport acquired when he made his 1906 trip to Aleppo on the desert outside of Aleppo in quest of Arabian horses. And this mare was presented to him along with the young man seated on the ground. And they came to America with their, I guess, 26 other horses that were in the Davenport importation. And they arrived here at a time, I think if you count them
Most
up,
of those pictures you used are old.
the other imported horses that had arrived here up to that time in 1906 that went on to have lines in Arabian breeding. The Davenport importation, I can't remember in one boatload that had arrived up to that point. And it became really an important element in American Arabian pedigrees and was crossed with the Cravat lines and practically everything else that's ever been here as well. This mare was probably raised in an environment such as we're not used to seeing horses raised in, and lived a life such as we're not used to seeing horses that have lived a life like that. And she sort of, in her pictures, comes across as kind of a bony, awkward-looking mare. And yet, if you look at her descendants, I think they probably tell you more what she really was than her own pictures do. And if you look at the descendants and then go back to this picture of her, you can see, well, that trait is present there. And you can see that in a different horse it's expressed a little differently. There is a certain type of really dynamic, magnetic chestnut stallion that breeds on from this mare. And probably the first example of it was her son, Hamwad. And he's not a very famous horse. He was bred at the Hingham Stock Farm way before there was Arabian horse magazines or Arabian horse shows. And he was sold, exported to Cuba. Was never used to stud in this country. But he's very closely related. He's by Hamran out of Bermuda, so he's very closely related to a couple of the stallions from the Bermuda line that ended up at the Kellogg Ranch. And he shows some of the same traits and qualities and features that they had. He had a full sister named Malaya, who was really, in some ways, fairly similar to him in expression. She's a feminine version. And she's quite a key mare in modern straight Davenport breeding, but she's also everywhere in American Arabian pedigrees at large, and CMK pedigrees, her various offspring. I wonder if the Hingham Stock Farm, they didn't know that they had something really special in this mare, because of all the Hamra daughters, that was the one they took back to him. This horse, Hanad, who was a sire at the Kellogg Ranch, and then went to Texas, and then Alice Payne went out there and rescued him and brought him to California, and he had yet another sister in California. There are things about this horse that I think very definitely come from Laguda, and he would not be the horse he is if he didn't have her in his pedigree. And whatever came together in this horse really breeds on fairly strongly in a package from him, including the balanced three-circle conformation and the upright carriage of his neck. This is Hanad, H-A-N-A-D. And these, like a lot of these Davenport horses, these early Davenport horses, is very important, at least the ones we're going to look at here, very important in modern straight Davenport breeding and also in CMK pedigrees at large. This is his very close relative, Antez, rather than being a grandson of Malaya, he's a son. And again, I think he shows quite a bit that comes from Waduda. You can see traits that come from his sire as well. But like or not, he would not be the stallion he is if he didn't have Waduda in his pedigree. Antez was a sire at the Kellogg Ranch, and then for General Dickinson at Traveler's Rest. Then he was exported to Poland and sired some foals there. Then he came back to the U.S. and had more foals born here. I think he lived up until 1921, up until 1944. I believe he was kicked by a mare, had to be put down. This is a daughter of Antez in the background there named Shylin. She is midwifing this foaling here. And Charles might be able to tell you a little more about it, but the mares from the Mayday line at Traver Farms, the Mayday was double to Shylin, have a tendency, if there's a mare that's going to pull out in the pasture, why they're just right there. And that is something that apparently is carried down genetically. I mean, the Mayday mares do, and so it's obviously something genetic. And here's an ancestor there doing the same thing. Now this is a horse foaled in 1971. Michael and I were looking at a grandson of his in Colorado that really looks quite a lot like him. And Michael said, well, that's Antez. And I said, well, no, I thought the golden chestnuts were Antez. And Michael said, well, Antez also does this. And I thought about it, and he's right. This is a horse named Ahmed Hafez, who's bred at Traver Farms, and is through his son Plantagenet, prominent in the more modern Davenport breeding. And this is his son Plantagenet. And I think there's a lot of Waduda and Antez and Malaya, that whole line that can be seen in this horse. Now we'll go back to another horse that was in the Davenport importation that's also had a strong influence on what his descendants look like. And this is a horse named Musan. Was acquired in the Damascus phase of the Davenport expedition. And he is known for passing on an alert character and tiny tipped-in ears, among other things, in his genetic package. It's another picture of Musan. And he was part of the problem with the Davenport importation, and a lot of the early breeding. The Davenport importation included 17 stallions and only 10 mares. Well, it's kind of hard to give all those stallions an equal play at stud when your ratio is like that. And he sired a number of foals, but he's really only in pedigrees through one of them. And that's his son Leighton. Leighton went out to California and was used as a ranch horse in the 1920s, working cattle. And then ended up at the Kellogg Ranch and sired foals in both places. And something about the eye and the ear, the sort of compact gray horse, a lot of vitality and verve breeds on through Leighton. So really, rather than talk about the Musan influence, you get Musan just through this one line, so it's really the Leighton line, because he obviously, like Michael said, he had two parents, and so he picked up some things from them as well. This is another picture of Leighton, and it's to illustrate, the reason I chose it illustrates the prominent eye cages that this horse had and passed on, which is another trait. They're just set very prominent, they're just set way out on the side of the face. And it's something that breeds on very strongly. Also, you can see the fineness of the lower face and muzzle to an extent. and watch how the eye cages are passed on from Leitan to his son, Dareb. Now this horse is Abimelech, who was the dam of, we were looking at earlier, it was the dam of Antez and grand dam of Haned. So she comes in again, and when he's bred to the Antez and Haned lines, you're doubling Malaya quite a lot, doubling and tripling her as the generations move along. This is a horse that's really passed on a lot of Leitan character. And there's another picture of him here. Note the ears again. There's a story I was discussing with Charles Craver this morning. I read in a magazine, so it's in print, about Alice Payne, about how somebody said, well, they used to sit up in the stands at horse shows with Alice Payne, and they'd sit up there with all the stud books and look up each horse as it came into the ring. Well, that was a much easier proposition then, because today you probably need a couple of rolling library cards to have all those stud books along with you. But the story goes that a horse would come in the ring and Alice would look at it and she'd say, well, it has moose on ears. And they'd look up the pedigree, and so many generations back, well, there he'd be. And Charles said, well, he always heard Alice Payne refer to that as, rather than moose on ears, Leitan ears, and mentioned that she credited it to Thelma Dean.
Who's the person in that?
I believe that is Florence McConnell, who owned him from the time he was about 7-year-old stallion right up until he died when he was 31, and absolutely adored him. And the McConnells did some very important, at least to modern Davenport breeding, matings with this horse, a Davenport mare named Antera, who was Antez's daughter. He's also in pedigrees. They had a mare named Anesa, who was by the bred at Kellogg's by the crabbed stallion Piranha, and out of Antera. And he's in quite a few pedigrees through that line as well, scattered through the breed.
He also started Farnham.
Oh, that's an important point. A foundation mare for Donald Jones was sired by this horse named Farnham. And Donald Jones was a very influential breeder in California, starting when, in the 1930s? I think he was already going by the 1930s. In fact, Donald Jones, I think, was one of the first 3 people who had an Arabian judging card. Bill Munson told me it was him and Donald Jones and one other person. Dareb had a couple of 2 sons and 2 daughters that were important as the modern straight Davenport breeding program developed. This is his daughter, Durana, who shows a Leitan character and also some of the features from her tail female line. And then she had a full sister named Deriva, who shows that stamp of horse again. Deriva has a son named Sir, who has the ears and the large eye, and partly the large eye is coming from Rishan, but he has the prominent eye cages and the ears and the muzzle and lower face. A lot of that is Leitan character. This is not such a great slide. This is Sir's son Lysander, a sire at Craver Farms. Another horse showing that influence, more modern Davenport horse, is Brimstone. Brimstone is sired by Durantes, who is a full brother to Deriva and Durana. He's the sire of one horse, anyway, that we're going to see today. This is another picture of Brimstone. And this slide's a little dark. This horse actually has just one cross to Leitan, and it's many generations back. This is a horse named Brigantine, and he's the sire of another stallion we're going to see today. He is by Tripoli, and out of a Tripoli daughter named Portia. Yeah, there's just the one cross and several generations back, but that package has come on down. Although there are other things going on in this horse as well. He is probably not as typical an example as maybe Sir was. That's too dark to see. But this was included, this is Ibn al-Amain, and this was included to show that there are other things that just kind of pop out. Probably in horse breeding at large, but this is an example of it happening in the Davenport breeding group where they're really, this horse is kind of a different type of horse, and you can see how he's related to his ancestors, and yet he's something kind of different that's come along, and he's, it's bred on from him. And as the pedigrees get more homogenized, it'll be interesting to see if other things turn up like that. They might or might not. But this is a horse named Ibn al-Amain.
Sire was another of those four full siblings that you talked about.
Now, do we have any question?
I think one of the reasons for the reputation, the movement of the Davenport horses is that quite a lot of them have had a very good adaptation to the human contact in the riding context, and they really train well. And it seems to me that their influence in pedigrees on outcross horses often is towards the performance type horse. And there seems, as a person with prejudice, which I certainly am, it seems to me that the influence of the Davenport in a pedigree is often to make the animal move its total body more. There's a type of movement which is very good and very much admired in which the body stays still and the legs move. And I'm not knocking that. But it is a little bit different than the type of movement where the whole horse moves, where the body moves with the legs. And I think the Davenport influence is towards that latter type. And I can't think of any way to prove it.
It would probably be possible to do an entire seminar on Arabian horses and how they move. I think Charles brought up an important point that we did see yesterday. Some really nice moving horses, and some of them had Davenport elements in their pedigrees. Some of them had only tiny Davenport elements, and some of them
got to know the straight Davenport horses, associated Davenport horses with horses that didn't move well, because we grew up breeding Gladys Brown Edwards. And I think we need to speak to that. My first exposure to a straight Davenport horse was watching a Brigantine move. And I almost passed out. I couldn't believe how this horse moved. I was so impressed. And I turned to Frank Hennischlager, who had him at the time. And I said, this is not the kind of movement that Gladys Brown Edwards wrote about. But I think you have to look at the history of the Kellogg Ranch. That H. Reese came to the ranch with a background in Morgan horses and hackneys. And when Charles Smith got to the ranch, and they were training those horses in a certain way. And you look at those old pictures, even old Lantaz had long feet. They were weighting these horses. My theory, and it's only a theory, is that the Davenport horses adapted the least to this kind of artificial method, this kind of shoeing, this kind of riding, and so were probably discarded for that reason, because they could look the least like the saddlebreds and the Morgans and the hackneys. And so I think that's important, but now that we've come back and a lot of us are more interested in a horse that moves his whole body, and we're finding that these horses move great, and I think consistently they do.
I think one thing that you have going on with Davenport movement mode, where they're carrying a very, very upright neck, they do not move very well, and those horses are trained successfully. That's not really the way they're trained either. The neck is brought into the position of a riding horse, and then they use their body more beautifully. It's true of any horse that if you stick its neck up too high, you will impair its action. You can stick its neck up too high with a bit, or sometimes the horse will just naturally carry its head up high, and it's a beautiful halter horse, but that's not the mode in which he does his performance. Well, the Davenports are they're flesh and blood, and they're the same as other horses that we have here. And if they are exhibited in such a way that they can't move, they won't move. And part of training and part of turning the horse loose so that you can see what it is doing more naturally is letting the horse put its head in a position where it is naturally meant to move. And if you have a generation of horse people, which we have had from time to time in this country, surely not now, whose view of a horse is that its head is way up in the air, you will find typically that those horses, when they're in that position, are not going to move very well. And it doesn't matter what breed you have. Well, now if you happen to have horses in which bloodlines are very strongly oriented towards the horse that looks off in the distance and keeps his head up in the air, when the horse is in that mode, he's not going to move very pretty. And when Musan was sticking his head up in the air like that, when Hanad was sticking his head up in the air like that, I'm sure that that was not the posture in which those horses exhibited their beautiful movement. I'm sure they had the beautiful movement. But you just have to recognize the mechanics of the horse, that if you get the head sticking way up in the air like that, you can't get their back. So you do have a beautiful moving horse. You have a horse with different abilities as to posture. And in certain postures, just like your car, in first gear it goes one way, and in high gear it goes another. And I think that some of the Davenports were particularly entranced when standing still, or getting their heads way up in the air. And if you take them out in the ring, and that's what they're doing, they're going to flip their feet out and do all sorts of funny things.